Good. Before anything else, a couple of what we normally call prolegomena. As far as the introduction is concerned, there's a mistake there in the sense that there's one position there that you mentioned that which I'm not anymore. I'm not anymore the promoter of justice of the prelature of Opus Dei. That term expired at the beginning of this year, and I apologize for not having updated that curriculum vitae. Everything there is updated except that one. And second, in terms of, shall we say, Zoom protocol or Zoom etiquette, the standard practice is that when we're in a Zoom class, everybody should have their mics muted so that I don't, so that everybody else doesn't get bothered by the ambient noise, especially if you have a noisy husband around or noisy dog or cat or kids moving around. That's one. And then second part also of Zoom etiquette is that when we're in a Zoom meeting, if you're attending, what do you call this? Please activate video so that we know that real persons that we recognize are in the meeting and that we don't have Chinese spies around or anything like that. No, since that's the in thing nowadays. No, okay, and then finally third, because there's been so much expectation about these classes, I just want to. Somebody even got stressed out already, and I told her to zoom out and take a walk and relax and things like that. I mean, this really is. I mean, don't make such a big fuss about these classes. Not that there you are. Yun. I've been trying to expand the screen without much success. Now finally did it because I have a 27-inch monitor, but I couldn't get all of you in. Okay, there. And with that, the third thing I wanted to say was in the original plan of classes, I was supposed to start today the doctrine class, class number 1. But I just thought that it would be a good idea since class number 1 is about the demonstrations for the existence of God. Are you getting me very well in terms of sound? You are, no? I mean, okay. That since the whole of class 1 is about the demonstration of the existence of God, the so-called proofs for the existence of God. By the way, just remembered now, there was a query earlier. I think somebody was volunteering to take notes of these classes and then to include them in the Google class, to share them with the Google class. And I was being asked by Cheryl if that was okay with me. And part of academic freedom, you can do whatever you want, right? So you just take notes. But with my prerogative to take it down if I notice that it's not being accurate with what I'm saying. In other words, it's okay to share, but we have to share properly also. No, we cannot spread erroneous notes either. So, but so if I notice that that's causing trouble, then I will take it down. But before that happens, in principle, people are welcome to share. No? Okay, so I thought that since the class was going to be about the intellectual proofs of the existence of God, to do away first of all with the fundamental error in modern philosophy and theology, for that matter, for not to say law. What's been bugging clear thinking in individuals and in whole societies, even I would even say of our entire civilization. No, you've heard of the woke culture. That we're in a woke culture, everything is relativized, and where is that coming from? Contrary to what people say, a typical joke during my university days back in the 70s was serious students took up sciences. They were in AS or in engineering. And those who can't hack it with the real serious subjects, they went to philosophy or political science. Now, they were the troublemakers, and they wreak havoc on campus. Those are the activists and people like that. That was the joke. Although I also know that I have plenty of friends who are pretty well equipped intellectually who are in that movement. In my class alone from Philippine science, easily 5 people died during the those periods of the first months of martial law. So that's, but there's that crazy idea that philosophy is not important. Well, on the contrary, philosophy is very important. Because from the from the summits of philosophical thinking, things trickle down and affects everyone else. So even the greatest scientists, your typical Bill Gates or all of these big minds that are the shakers and movers of our civilization, they're all suffering from the consequences of the philosophical mindsets or philosophical principles that had been set down there by philosophers going back to the 12th century. So if I were to trace the single most pernicious source of all the errors of our time, I would put it on the error of what is known as nominalism. And that's the reason why I want to dedicate this first class to tackling this problem so that you get convinced of what the proper way to think is. We cannot take it for granted anymore that people think properly, because precisely this is so deep seated in our culture that people are nominalists without really realizing that they are nominalists philosophically. I hope some of you at least took up philosophy or have backgrounds in philosophy. But if not, just be patient, have an open mind, and hopefully these things, I'll try to explain these things in such a way that can be understood. Okay? Now, I'd like to share my screen. How do you do this? I want to share my screen. Can you give me permission? Because do I have permission to share screen?
Yes, yes,
You,
yes po, Father. Yes po.
okay. I have permission to share screen. Now, how do you do that? Swap shared screen with video. Whoa. I don't even see the controls out there. Let's see this. Oh, there you are. Okay, react, share. This will stop other screen sharing. Do you want to continue? Yes. Okay, and I will share that screen. Oops. You see, that's a problem with this little gadget. Okay. Oh boy, it's slow. Share. Okay. Somebody's somebody has his thing to video. Turn off your audio. At least I think it's Agbiag vlog. There,
Yes
it's
po,
already
Father. Yes po, Father. I'm trying to mute her na po.
okay. Now, can you see my shared screen? Yeah.
Ate Ching, please turn off.
There. Somebody is still on.
Um, that's Ate Chingbotero.
She's she's muted naman, Han.
Okay, now I'm okay. Now you can hear me, right? So I will proceed. Um, you see, it should have been class number 2, but I'm putting it as class number 1. The single most pernicious cause of the juridic, ethical, and theological quagmire of modern times is what in philosophy is known as nominalism. Now, what is nominalism? This is what is known as an epistemological problem. Epistemology is that branch of philosophy that deals with knowledge. How do we know? Most people don't ask themselves this question. They just take it for granted that we know, we perceive reality around us. But how does that happen? Hmm? In other words, how does the process of our knowing go? It's like asking yourself, how do you taste? You don't normally ask yourself that, you just taste. You taste with your tongue, you taste flavors. How do you smell? But very early on in my life, I had to make a term paper on how we smell. You know, the olfactory system, in other words, and the theories on how your olfactory system works. There are really a bunch of receptors that molecules fit into, and when the molecules go there, it fires, sends a signal. Now, odors are just shapes of molecules. So they classify the different odors, characterize the shape of the molecules, they're humongous molecules many times, and then that's it. All the odors are like that. Now, when all the receptacles are filled with odor molecules, then you can't smell anymore. That's the reason why those who live beside the Pasig or in Payatas don't smell Payatas anymore or the Pasig River because all their receptacles for that kind of odor are already taken up. In order to smell again, it has to be cleaned. How do you do that? Since everything in nature is a matter of equilibrium, in other words, there's a rate of molecules coming in, there's also a rate of molecules getting dislodged. It's just a question of which is more in that equilibrium. So therefore, if you reverse the process by going to an environment where there are few of that given molecule, fewer number, then they will dislodge and you'll have your olfactory system clear again. That's also the way you taste. Pardon these things, I can't help it. It's very ingrained in my formation, these scientific things, that when you taste, the same thing. There are only actually 5 tastes. Since many of you are women there, you know what I'm talking about. There are only 5 tastes, right? Salty, sour, sweet, bitter, and umami. So everything else is not taste anymore. It's odor. That's the reason why, in order to taste something, you have in Tagalog, we even have a term for it, nam namin. Num 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 num. When you do that, you're moving the thing at your post nasal cavity and you're smelling it. Proof of this: close your nose and taste something, and you'll see you'll only taste the 5 tastes. You won't recognize adobo, for example, with your nose closed, because all the in between flavors, aside from those 5, are really smells. So the same thing will work. That thing, what I said earlier, if you taste something for too long, then your taste for it gets jaded and you can't taste it anymore. And there's the reason why if you go to a good restaurant, there are several courses, then in between they serve you a sorbet in order to clean your palate for the next one. Or the same thing happens when you're going to taste wine. You have to clear your taste buds for the next one. Now, look at that. That's an awful lot of words to describe a simple matter that everybody takes for granted, that you just taste, you just smell, right? Same thing happens with thinking. People take for granted that they think, but actually they're not thinking properly, and that's what I like to tackle here. Most physical most scientists, the physical scientists, take this for granted. Philosophers, especially metaphysicians, consider this of fundamental importance. If we cannot be certain of the truth of what we know or think we know, then we're just fooling each other. The only other matter of more fundamental importance is the act of being that the metaphysicians and philosophers would say, without which things would not be. And again, we're just, pardon my French, bullshitting each other, because that is really what communication and discourse would be if things were not really, and we could never be certain if we knew them or not. Then, as I would scream to a class, then what the hell are we talking about and wasting our time here for if we can't be certain of anything? Our past president was very fond of rambling on national TV, and then the following day just saying, I was just joking. No? So, I mean, I have very little respect for a person who does not honor his words, or who does not put importance to what he's saying, or who is not even, I would even call it sincerity, not sincere with what he's saying. When you say something, a man's word is supposed to be his bond. So we're supposed to mean what we say and not say afterwards, I didn't mean that, or it could be taken some other way. No, words, ideas, concepts should be accurate representations of reality. Otherwise, as I said, that's just a whole lot of crap. And I have a cousin who's dead now. And when we were younger and we'd go around lecturing on certain things, one of the favorite things he said, he's a philosopher, magna cum laude from Ateneo. He would say was, what did he say? We should all have what he called a crap meter. A crap meter. A shitometer. Nothing to do with shiitake mushrooms, but yes, with that other variety that you find in the road and you don't want to step on. Because our logic, our intellect should immediately detect when we're being given crap. Logical fallacies, epistemological inaccuracies. In other words, good old-fashioned errors. And we should not accept errors. And in the logical discourse in many places, and Congress is a perfect example of this, if not the Senate, and I don't mind them suing me, because if they did, then I'll really give them examples of the lack of logic in the discursive process. And we cannot accept that in the academic discourse. We have to be logical. And logic is just a reflection of what happens in the mind. If there's order in our thinking, if there's order in our intellect, then we should trust it. Otherwise, then again, we're just fooling ourselves. If you can't be certain of what you know, then, as I said, what the hell are we talking about and wasting our time here for? So let's make a review of what in philosophy is called rational psychology, which is different from experimental or clinical psychology. That's what you study in Ateneo, in UP, in LaSalle, the kind of psychology that psychologists, the normal psychologists would have, or psychiatrists. No, I'm talking about philosophical psychology, rational psychology, of something deeper, of how really the mind works. How the mind works. Okay, you can't imagine how much distraction such things cause in my thinking process, because especially when I'm discussing something like this, I'm deep in thought. So I'd really appreciate it if people had a bit more of discipline and avoided those things, because it jars my thinking process. It's like putting a virus into a computer, and for me to recover the thing takes some time, as what you can see right now. So philosophers had been elaborating these things since the time of Plato and Aristotle, 3rd century BC. They all gelled into a systematic body of knowledge with the scholastics of the Middle Ages, specifically with St. Thomas Aquinas, that fat monk of the 13th century. Also called the angelic doctor, not because of his mobility, it's too heavy, but for his clarity of intellect, that he thought almost like an angel. Like that's what you call intuitive thinking. When we think in a stepwise fashion, in a logical discourse, discursive. This, therefore that. And normally in logic, even you have the major premise, you have the minor premise, and then the conclusion. That's the way we think, from the more known to the less known. And then we go into newer knowledge even. But the pure spirits, like the angels, unfortunately the devils too, because the devils were angels, grasp reality in one blow. That's what we call intuition. That's not discursive. That's the reason why the angels, everything that they can know, they knew from the first moment of their existence. And that's why for the angels, there's no unfolding of knowledge. There's no unfolding of being either. They're almost eternal. When you say eternal, most people don't really get the full meaning of eternity. Eternity is not just foreverness. Eternity is unchangedness. That's why only God is eternal, because he's not changed. He has always been, he is, and he will be exactly the same way. Now, the angels are almost like that, but not quite, because they had a beginning. To begin is a change. From nothing to being, that's a change, right? Whereas before they didn't exist, now they exist. But from the moment of their existence, they haven't changed. Everything that they can be, they already are, because that's what change means. Think of it this way. No, this is philosophy, and I hope you're getting enthused with this. What is change? Think about it. What do we mean when we say things change? Change is nothing but the passage from potency to act, from potentiality to being, from what you can be to being that already. Okay? So therefore, you can't really be something for which you never had a potency to. That's one of the things that you have to grasp with in metaphysics, that you can only be something or some way that you had a potency for. If you didn't have a potency for it, you can't be that. You're not yet that, but you can be. And when you are, that passage from not being that to being that, that's what you call change. Now, when we say that something is eternal, we're implying that there's nothing that he can be, that he isn't it. He isn't yet. And that's the way God is. Everything that God can be, he always has been. There's no potency in God. He's fully actual. He is. And that's the reason why in the revelation of God to Moses in the burning bush in the Sinai, when Moses asked, who will I say sent me? If the Israelites ask me who sent me to set them free from Egypt. And then the voice said, he who is sent you. He who is. I am who am is another way of describing himself in that same passage. I am who am. When you and I talk, we normally, when we employ the verb of being, which is or are, if it's plural, it's normally followed by something else. I am, and then you put something else. Because my act of being is not infinite. My act of being is limited by the way that I am. I'm not in an undetermined way. I am in a finite way. So I will have to say, I am a man. And for that matter, since I'm a man, then I cannot be a woman. I cannot be a dog, a house. So I am a man. Hmm? You know what? From the administrator, you can mute everyone so that there's no capacity for.
Father Jim?
So maybe we will just mute ourselves. Everybody mute ourselves.
That was that was what was expected naman po talaga.
Yeah,
Kaya
oo
po
nga.
talagang
Oo, kasi kasi
Okay,
nagsasalita siya.
yeah, Father, yeah.
There you go.
Thank
There
you
you
po,
go.
Father. Thank you po for unmuting.
so I've unmuted myself.
Yes
I
po. Thank you, Father. Because I have to mute all and
okay.
that happened.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Let's
Thank you, sir,
continue.
Father. Yes po.
Patience.
Yes
This,
po, Father.
this is what you
Thank you.
call a learning curve. Now, all of these are good for our intellectual humility, since we modern people tend to think that we know better in many things. Yes, in technology, in science, and many things, almost in everything, but not in philosophy. I'm willing to bet not about this or else I should not be presenting this introductory class. I'm sorry, this is a different thing. Okay, so now let's go here. So how do we know? This is how do we know? There you have a drawing of what is known as simple apprehension. Something that, as I said earlier, most people, 99.999% of people don't think about, but philosophers of the proper orientation think about. How do we know? So look at that drawing. So that's you, not exactly your head, you, right? Can you see my cursor? You see the cursor, right? Okay.
Yes, Father.
Yes, Father.
Now this is reality here. It enters your intellect, your mind, you, not directly. The only thing in contact with the external world in us are our external senses. Of course, our body is in contact with the external world, but as far as our knowing process is concerned, the only thing in contact with the external world are our external senses, our sense of sight, our sense of smell, our sense of hearing, our sense of taste, and our sense of touch. So when we capture reality, it enters us through these external senses. Then what happens? Goes into the internal senses. Can you imagine that? We have internal senses, and what are these? There are three. One, the so-called common sense. I hope you can see that. It's violet. And then the imagination and the memory. Common sense, the common sense is not what most people understand it to be, no? Which is the thinking common to everyone. No, technically speaking, the common sense is a sense that we have that gathers together the data given by the external senses. So when you capture something sensible, like what? Well, I don't know, like yeah, you're looking at this screen, this monitor, for example. No, the eyes will just see colored shapes, but then it's not just a color and a shape, but what you see there is a totality, that those colors and shapes and textures have been put together into images. And that's what we call the common sense. Now, when it's just the sight, then we call it the imagination. And then you have a memory also, which is an internal sense that stores those things. Now, look at that. All of that level of intellection we share with the animals. The animals too have their external senses. They also have their internal senses. Yeah, dogs have common sense. They have imagination. And they have memory. That's why you can train them. You know, when a dog is sleeping, for example, you see sometimes it moves. You can't really ask it what it's doing. But some scientists have put probes and into their ECG or the electrical impulses in the brain, and they can see that something is going on. It's not in a catatonic state, so to speak. The dog is dreaming in the same way that we dream. That's the animals. That's the animal side of us. Now, where does that end? It ends in what is called a phantasm. A phantasm is like well, what is a phantasm? It's like an image in the mind, but more than just an image, because when you say image, it's just shape and texture and color. A phantasm is a total thing. The impression in the mind, the sensible impression in your internal senses, in you, of that particular stimulus. Something that the animals have too. They have the end process of all that is a phantasm. Try this experiment. If you have ever trained a dog, or a cat for that matter, try to understand or analyze what is the process of training. In the process of training a dog, you associate a certain stimulus, therefore a phantasm, with another phantasm. I remember this American who was teaching everybody how to train their dog in the 1960s in Channel 7 of Uncle Bob. It was a program on Sunday at 8 o'clock in the morning. It was called Training You to Train Your Dog. I still remember that lady. She looked like Doris Day, no? And the first lesson of the whole thing was, a dog learns by pleasing and displeasing results. If you tell a dog, sit, and at the same time you push his hind legs down and you pull up the collar with the choker so that he's forced to assume that position, otherwise he's going to get choked, then he associates that position, the phantasm of that position, with the phantasm of the word sit, and the unpleasantness of not assuming that position. So those three things, those three phantasms get associated. And if you repeat it 100 times in 100 days, then he will remember it. So when you say sit, he will do that thing. That's what you call conditioned response. You train a dog. So that's what the phantasm is. And that part of us is also trainable. That's what athletes do. You train yourself for certain movements, and it's all in the basis of the training effect. But okay, that's the animal side of it. Now we'll go to the spiritual side of us. And this is the knowing. Do animals know? No, they don't really know. They get trained in the basis of phantasms. We know, and now we go to this process of knowing. Now, look at that drawing again. The phantasm passes from the realm of the animal, the material world, to the realm of the spirit, in what is known as the passive intellect. That's your intellect, that your spirit has two operations, basic operations, knowing and willing. As far as your knowing power is concerned, it can further be subdivided into passive intellect and active intellect. The passive intellect is like your computer turned on, it's on sleep mode. It needs to be awakened, not off. Your intellect is never off. Even when you're sleeping, it's on. That's the reason why you can dream. If the intellect goes off, you're dead. The intellect is never off. From the minute the child is born, or even in the womb, the intellect is already working, because that's the soul. The soul starts working. The only thing is it develops. And you can imagine, what does an embryo know? Nothing. Why? because there has been no input yet, that the passive intellect is awakened by the introduction of a phantasm. And phantasms come from the external senses, being gathered together by the internal senses, and finally going to the passive intellect, which has been on ever since we were conceived. Okay? Now, what happens? When the phantasm impinges on the passive intellect, it forms, look at this thing. It's amazing how this scholastics thought this up. But the more you think about it and you reflect on your thinking process, you will realize that this is what is happening. The only thing is this goes on so fast that you're not aware of it. But now that you're studying this, I want you to be aware of it, that the passive intellect impinged by the phantasm produces what is called an impressed species. What is an impressed species? It's like a notion. And it's not even a notion. It's the first idea of a thought. When you become aware of something. Imagine, for example, you're there, you just almost nakatanga. In that time of the afternoon, we're taking your coffee, enjoying the cool of the afternoon when the sun is already down, there's no more glare, and the temperature is right. But at the same time, you can still see things and you can be aware of your environment. You're just there sipping your beer or your coffee or your tea. And then all of a sudden you become aware of a something. Like what? Oh, I don't know, a rustling in the bush. You see, that's an impressed species, that there's something rustling in the bushes. Okay, that's the impressed species. Now, once the passive intellect is stimulated by that phantasm, such that an impressed species is produced, your active intellect now, your conscious intellect, acts on it, looks at it closer. Ano ba yun? What was that? What was that? No? And on the basis of looking at it, not looking at it with eyes, but putting your attention to it, then you form what is known as an expressed species. So active intellect acting on the impressive species forms an expressive species. Like what? It's a bird. Imagine that it's the first time that you saw a bird. And so you form the notion of a bird. A bird, general bird. Huh? That's what you call a notion. That's an idea still in an iffy state. So your mind even doesn't have a name for it. It's a creature that later on you'll call it a bird. But at that first encounter with a bird, imagine your first encounter with a bird, so you're just abstracting, your mind is abstracting from that specific bird. What makes a bird a bird? The birdness of a bird. You see? The birdness of a bird. That's a notion. And then here, an amazing thing happens. That your intellect, with that notion of the birdness of a bird, goes back to the phantasm to check out that notion that you have formed of what makes a bird, checks it out with that reality of the bird. What reality? Well, the phantasm of the bird. And if it squares up, okay, that's what makes a bird a bird. Imagine that the notion that you've made of a bird is precisely what we normally understand by a bird, you know? Whether it's an ostrich or a turkey or a chicken or a falcon or an eagle, you see that your mind, they're all birds. Why? They all share that essence of a bird, the birdness of a bird. That there are wings, that there's that head with a beak, and there are legs, etc., which is very different from a reptile. By the way, birds, as you know very well, evolved from reptiles. First reptiles, and then they form wings. The front, the four legs became wing-like in the process of evolution until they could fly. So things like that. Okay, so when that happens, the conversio ad phantasmata, the return to the phantasm, you see this arrow here. Where is it going? It's going there to that phantasm that was produced first. And if it gets verified, then the concept gels. Bird. Now, that process that normally you take for granted happens all the time. And once you had formed that concept of bird, remember, a concept which is accurate because you tested it against that specific bird. Now that concept now can be used for future encounters with birds. And then you can recognize that's a bird until you encounter something that is not quite bird. Seems like it was a bird, but hindi pala, you see? And then you can start composing ideas with other concepts. You compose concepts, and then you make judgments, and then you store them in intellectual memory. Different from this sensible memory that we have in common with the animals. This is the intellectual memory, which is not anymore material, although it makes use of the brain somehow, but it's not just brain. The intellectual memory is something immaterial. It's not material. Because can you imagine, if it were material, then people with large memories should have larger heads, right? But some of the brightest people I know have smaller heads than mine. Because I have a big head, but I know some people who are very brighter than me, and they have smaller heads. And so it's not the size of the head. Otherwise, the elephant will be very bright. But as you know very well, elephants are not that bright. They're just elephants, or the whales for that matter. Okay? Now, why did they bother to go through all of this? Because this process of simple apprehension is fundamental. It happens all the time. And now I'm going to show you where you get into trouble when you forget the process of simple apprehension. And this is, there. The first wrong step was made by a Franciscan schoolmaster in the 13th century in the parish of Ockham. You know, the parish is not an ecclesiastical word. Parish is barangay. That's the closest you can. When you say Ockham Parish, is the barangay of Ockham. The same way that Oxford is a parish, the barangay of Oxford. No. So anyway, William of Ockham is known in history books as William of Ockham. He comes from Ockham. He was educated with the Grey Friars, Franciscans of London, and schooled in that's his school, Nominalism. What was his germinal idea? His germinal idea was to ask himself, and now he's asking us, and you can ask yourself, how do we know whether or not our concepts, those concepts that we have formed, correspond with the reality? Because we said earlier, diba, that we have an expressive species, then it goes back to the phantasm, and then we realize that, yeah, that's a tree. But his question was, yeah, but the phantasm is already inside us. The phantasm is already in your mind. Now, how do you know that the phantasm that you formed corresponds with the reality? So, for example, right now, you can ask yourself, are you really looking at the monitor? Are you really listening to Father Jim talking? Or is that your imagination? Or just your perception of the reality? That was his problem. And he didn't answer it. Because you see his problem, since my mind is not in direct contact with reality, then there's no way for me to check whether my mind is accurate with reality. Because the only way for me to check whether my mind is accurate with reality is if my mind went to reality directly. And it doesn't do that. The only thing in us, the only faculty that we have that is in direct contact with the external world, with the reality around us, are our external senses. It's not even our internal senses. Your imagination, your memory, your common sense, those are not in direct contact with the reality. The only thing in direct contact with the reality are your external senses, your sight, your touch, your smell, your hearing, and your taste buds. Okay? So that was his problem, and he couldn't answer it. Now, that was the first wrong step, and the next wrong step occurred less than 100 years later, across the channel because it was in England, remember, across the channel in France with René Descartes, you know him, who put Descartes before Demule, and he took William of Occam's germinal question to its ultimate conclusion. Up to that moment, the criterion for truth was the congruence of the mind with reality. You are in truth if your ideas, your intellect is congruent with reality, is in accordance with reality. Well, since William of Ockham put that question, but your mind is not in direct contact with reality, how can you know that it's forming the right ideas about reality? What's the point of comparison? Then René Descartes took it a step further and says, it doesn't really matter. For all you know, there's no reality out there. What's important is that your mind is thinking and it's concocting these things. So for René Descartes, the criteria, the ultimate criteria for reality are two things. Number one, neat and distinct ideas. For as long as your mind can form neat and distinct ideas, and the internal logic among those ideas. All of that independent from reality. So for him, mind creates reality. That's why he said that, no? Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. If I can think it, it's real. That's a big step. And for those of you who are thinking properly, it seems like, how can you say that? You know, that's the reason why I had a tough time passing the course in modern philosophy and also modern theology when I was taking it up for the first time, because a normal mind just can't ride on this way of thinking. But in order to pass that course, you have to ride it. So put yourself in his mindset and you say, yeah, of course, you can take that. Now, here's the big problem, that many people actually think that way without knowing it. Your typical Gen Zer right now, who will argue with you no end regarding gender, I call it gender dyslexia, gender dysphoria, no? That gender is a matter of choice. And they really can see it, but isn't gender, that's why you have to agree on definitions. What is gender? And they will say gender is your consciousness, your, I don't know what, regarding your sexuality. Wait a minute, you're confusing things there. Maybe we should start first with sexuality. So what is sexuality? Well, it's what is different between male and female. In everything else, we're the same. We're human beings, except in that particular gene, the XX and XY. Of course, there are secondary characteristics that follow from that, but the fundamental difference is the XX and the XY chromosome or gene. And that's your sex. And you're not free to choose it. It's given to you by the way you were conceived, by the way the kind of sperm and the kind of egg that got into your makeup, no? Okay. Now, the baggage of behavioral patterns and cultural values and attitudes, etc., that you associate with sexuality, that's what you call gender. But that follows unless something wrong happens, in which case a male abnormally develops feminine tastes, feminine mannerisms, feminine behavioral patterns. I say abnormally because a male should normally develop masculine patterns. But okay, in the process of upbringing, somebody might, in the same way that some people become right-handed and left-handed and have different tastes for certain things, that can happen, right? But it's not normal. Now, the same thing happens here in this process of intellection, that the thinking process for simple apprehension is innate in human nature. In other words, you don't need to question whether the process from external senses to the formation of concepts, whether that happens or not. It just does. And to that question, how do I know that my concept of the reality in front of me is the same concept that the next guy and the other lady over there is forming? Those are the typical rhetorical questions that are best answered by actually doing it. Get 1,000 people, put them in front of a stimulus, an elephant, and ask them what they see. And all of them will describe the same thing. And the one who doesn't, well, he's abnormal. And that's as simple as that. There are abnormal people, but normal people will see an elephant. And if he doesn't, well, there's something wrong with him, and you treat him as such. Okay? This is important because this is at the bottom of your question to me, Cheryl, and I will allude to it later. Now, what are the consequences of this mindset of putting a doubt on the accuracy or the integrity of simple apprehension? The immediate consequence is to relativize simple apprehension. That your truth is different from my truth, meaning to say that the way I perceive reality may be different from your way of perceiving reality. If you look at that statement and at that experience, honestly, you will see that no, the perception will be the same. It's the conclusions that may vary. No? So from that first impression of my example earlier of being in front of an elephant, of 1,000 people, 999 of them will see an elephant. But one may not see an elephant. He's abnormal. But there may be another one or another 10 who will refuse to see an elephant. Why? Because they don't want to see an elephant. Why? Because an elephant is a protected species. So therefore, they're not supposed to shoot it. But if they really want to shoot an elephant, then they'll convince themselves they're seeing a carabao or just a cow, which they can shoot, a pretty large one. Because in Europe, they grow cattle to 1,500 pounds, no? Unlike in the US, in Argentina and Australia, where they use the law of diminishing returns and they raise cattle only up to a certain size, because after that, no matter how much you feed it, it's not going to get that conversion as much anymore. So they slaughter it. That's why they're normally young cattle. The ones coming from Australia, from Argentina, from Brazil, and okay, what's the advantage of that? It's more economical, definitely greater yield, but the flavor is not going to be as great as an older cattle. Well, in Europe, they grow them even up to 12 years. Can you imagine? 15 years, and they grow huge. Of course, they will become hard, right? No, not if you don't walk them around too much. You feed them. And why do you want to do something like that? To get the best steaks. That's why the best steaks are not in the US. Now, Peter Luger steaks, that's nothing compared to what you can get in El Capricho, for example, in Leon. Google Capricho, and you will see what kind of steak that is. No? Okay, so let's go to the immediate consequence of this is relativism. And this is best exemplified by Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804, in Königsberg. You apply that to religion and you get religious indifferentism. All religions are the same, which, by the way, was not what the Pope said recently when he said in Singapore, that all religions lead us to God. But he didn't say they're all the same. Just like saying there are many roads going to Baguio, but they're not all the same. Some are more comfortable than others. Some are faster than others. That's the same thing there. Because by the very definition of the word religion, what is religion? Religion is the attempt of the rational mind to relate, to reach out to his maker, to the uncaused cause. So of course it leads to God. But some are straightforward, others are pretty faulty, and some, while the revealed religion, which is first Judaism and then Catholicism, is not anymore man's attempt to reach out to God, but rather God's initiative to reach out to man. That's what happens with revealed religion. Well, the religious indifferentism, because of this, what do you call this cogito of Kant, based on the nominalism of William of Ockham, would say that all religions are the same. It depends on where you're coming from. And when you apply that to morals or ethics, that's again relativism. Your morals are different from mine. So that's why they insist so much, leave your morality out of this discussion. When they're discussing abortion, they're discussing divorce, etc., etc., they will say, leave your morality out of this. Well, if I leave my morality out of this, maybe I can just kill you or have you killed so that I don't have any opponent anymore. So it's the same thing. The means justify the ends, etc. Of course, the decantation of all of this, the distillate of all these errors through the centuries, is what we call now as modernism, which poor Pius X, Saint Pius X, thought he put an end to in 1904 onwards, when he condemned modernism. But what he didn't know, since there's no capital punishment in the church, the modernists, the philosophers and theologians thinking this way, just played possum. They stopped publishing, but they kept on teaching, and they came out of the woodwork with the Second Vatican Council because they thought that was an opportunity. They thought they would put their modernist thoughts into the Second Vatican Council. That's why, for those of you who are old enough, the first documents, drafts coming out there were pretty scary, like what happened to PCP2. When I was reading the first drafts of PCP2, they were modernists, very wrong theology. But of course, that's before the bishops put their mark on it. And the bishops have the enlightenment of the Holy Spirit when they're gathered together and united with the Pope. So what happened? At the end of the Second Vatican Council, the 16 documents that came out are fantastic documents. The same thing with PCP2. The final documents are marvelous. Now what happened? You would have thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't, unfortunately. Why? Because afterwards, the documents of the Second Vatican Council had to be spread and taught. And who was going to teach them? The usual suspects, those in the academe, the modernists, etc. And that gave rise, for those of you who are old enough, to what we call the post-conciliar crisis, the wrong interpretation of the Second Vatican Council. So for those of you who have been around or were in college already in the 1970s, that was the height of the post-conciliar crisis. And in certain campuses in this country, Catholic schools, Catholic universities, they were teaching these post-conciliar errors. There was a crisis that towards the end of the papacy of Pope Paul VI, it martyred him, led him even to say that I'm afraid that the smoke of Satan has entered even the Vatican and even in very high places. Of course, all of that came to a head when he died and the masterpiece of the Holy Spirit came out, which is Saint John Paul II. Was a great philosopher, great theologian, masterful communicator, and young enough to last for almost a 30-year papacy, because he had to undo a generation of havoc wreaked by the postmodernists and the post-conciliar thinkers. But he succeeded. And there's the reason why now there's a reversal in all of these tendencies. So if nowadays there are people who attack the Pope and says he's leading the church wrong, they're all wet. He's not doing that, because this Pope is very, very, shall we say, orthodox in his thinking. The only thing is, people want to misinterpret him. If you want to misinterpret someone, you can do it. No, you can even say that Pontius Pilate is part of the Catholic faith, the Catholic creed, because he's there. He's in the Apostles' Creed. Remember, suffered under Pontius Pilate, etc. Okay, so next slide. The almost funny case of the Germans. The German language is given to building words. This is a new twist to the chemical principle, or the principle in chemistry, which is called the Aufbauprinzip, which is the building principle of filling up electron orbitals to come up with the lowest potential energy, etc., etc. An example of this is the word, for those of you who know German, Schweinrollbrat. It's now available in Rustans. Before, I mean, for many years, I was hoping they'd do something like that in the Philippines, but now it's pretty common. No? Schwein means pork. Roll means roll. Braten is a verb. It means to roast or to fry. No? That's why when they say bratwurst, you see, the word there is brat. Wurst means sausage. So bratwurst is sausage for frying, a fried sausage, bratwurst. So when somebody says a fried bratwurst, it's actually redundant, no? Braten na nga, fried pa, no? It's like saying lechon de leche. When people say that, lechon de leche, a pigling, a suckling pig is what you call un cuchinillo, a small pig. When you say de leche, it's really suckling still, de leche. Now, in Spanish, when you put the ending on, it means big. That's why you say cabron, no? Cabra is the normal goat. A cabron is a big goat, no? So when you say lechon de leche, it's a contradiction. It's either de leche, still small, or it becomes a lechon. The only thing is, in Tagalog, the word lechon has become to mean roasted. No, no, it doesn't mean that. No? So you cannot say lechon de leche. It's either the leche or it's lechon. So the same thing happens. Now, here's the thing. When the Germans make up new words, and it's like that, no? It's fun to look at the long German word and you actually cut it up. It's almost like a paragraph of different words, therefore different concepts put together. They know, normally you should know, that you're just putting together concepts. The bad thing is, if somebody were actually to think that by putting together concepts, which are just concepts, you're actually creating reality. That's what happens with dreams. You know, what is a mermaid? It's a concoction of your mind of a fish and a woman. But you know that you're just making it up in your mind, that there are no real mermaids around. Same thing happens with the werewolf or with the centaur. No, centaur. It's why? Because you have an idea of what horses are. You have an idea of what men are in terms of shape, and if you put it together, then you'll have a centaur. But you know, it doesn't exist. You just made it up, right? Now the bad thing is, if you're a relativist, if you're a Cartesian, if you're a nominalist, remember what Descartes say, for as long as you can think it, then it is. So that this is what's going to happen. The most absurd example of this are these latest things that they have been doing with sex change. Just because they think that they can think it, or it's even, it seems like it's medically feasible to have a sex change, they think they actually succeeded in doing it. When you look at it very, very closely, no, they didn't have a sex change. They just had a change of genitals, of organs, etc., or the so-called secondary sexual characteristics. They remove the breasts, or they build breasts, or they remove the genital organs, or they build them. But it hasn't changed the fact that person, if you look at the cellular level and analyze the cells, you're still the genes. You will see that's a man and that's a woman. And sooner or later, that's going to bite them in the ass, as they say, because reality is a bitch, as somebody would say. No, reality is reality. You can go around it. No, okay. And this is what happened, for example, with that problem with the synodal the synodal path. Just because they know they were bright enough, because after all, they're Germans, that they were not making a synod, because a synod is very well defined in canon law. But they were saying, yeah, but we're doing something following a synodal path. The synodalen Weg. Weg is path in German. The synodalen Weg. Now, what's the sleight of hand that happened? Just because I made up the concept that this is a synodalen Weg, then the next thing that they did was to make the results, the conclusions of that synodal path that they made imperative, binding among all the German churches. Now, what is that? You have made a synod, not just a synodalen Weg, no? But you know very well that they didn't have a synod. Why? Because to have a synod, you must have papal mandate to have a synod. And the Pope didn't give them that mandate. As a matter of fact, proscribed that whole synodal process. Now, searching for an image to end this presentation, I was amazed at the number of images Google presented under the simple concept of man cutting off the branch he's sitting on. Because that's what exactly nominalism and relativism does. To willfully doubt our knowing faculty is self-destructive, since it is the only one we have. Why should I doubt my knowing process when it's a given? It's like me doubting, do I really have two legs? Am I really a man? I look down on myself, especially if I do it in the bathroom. I realize, yes, I am. No? But for me to doubt it, maybe I'm a woman in a man's body. Well, that's already because I want to. The normal process is that for me to realize I'm a man, unless I have a motive for wanting to be a woman. And this is the point here. There must be a motive. In law, it's what you call a pretension, a ratio decidendi, the reason for saying something, the reason for saying something, the reason for deciding something. And what is that? To construct one's own reality. It's the old temptation to Adam and Eve, to be like God, deciding, determining what is good and what is evil. So nominalism, therefore, is modern man's version of original sin and Satan's non serviam at the dawn of creation. I will not serve. You know, this business of I will not serve of Satan, you have to understand it by knowing Latin. Non serviam does not mean I will not serve as in minister. It actually means I will not abide. I will not abide. Hindi ako susunod. Hindi ako sasakay. Hindi ko susundin. What? The plan of God, the creation of God, the design of God. I want to make my own design. That was the fundamental pretension of Satan, to deny the Creator's design and not to abide by the laws of that design. Non serviam, I will not abide. And that was veiled echo by Adam and Eve, to be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, in scripture, when you say that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, You have to understand knowledge there in the way Scripture uses the word knowledge. Remember in the Annunciation, when the angel Gabriel told Mary that she was going to be the mother of God, what was her protest? Not protest, but rather her mental, shall we say, her question. How can this be, since I know not man? You see? Because to know means to experience. How will this be since I haven't experienced man? In other words, how will this be since I'm a virgin? How can I be the mother if I'm a virgin? How can I be the mother of anything or anyone if I haven't had any carnal knowledge of man? So the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, if you put it in modern parlance, is actually the tree of the experience of good and evil. Because up to that moment, creation had no experience of evil. Everything was going like clockwork according to the divine design. And that's the reason why the test was very simple: to obey me by not touching this fruit, this tree. Because this tree, if you touch it, that's your experience of good and evil. You would have experienced, shall we say, disobeying the design. And they took it because the devil told them, well, that's good because you will have the power of deciding good and evil for yourselves instead of just following the design made by God. So the goodness or malice of human acts are not mere labels applied by the rational mind to such acts. Goodness and malice are intrinsic properties of acts in relation to human nature and to the nature of things. How can I remove this sign here? But anyway, I can't. Seems like it's there.